My parents gave my sister $250,000 and me a moldy house, then sued me when I made it worth millions. Hi, I'm Blake, 31, and I just burned a letter from my parents' lawyer in a barrel next to my half-built cabin in Wyoming. I didn't even open it. See, 2 years ago, my family gave me a house and $250,000 to my sister. Except the house was a moldy wreck, and the cash was clean, ready to spend. She got Europe, a BMW, and a penthouse lease. I got raccoons in the attic and a cracked foundation. And now? They're suing me for turning that dump into $1 million masterpiece. It started with an email. A Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. I clicked open a home appraisal report and had to blink twice. $1. 4 million. I stood there barefoot in the living room, still smelling of fresh epoxy and sawdust. The white oak floors gleamed in the morning light. I'd framed those windows myself, by hand, in a coat so thick with sawdust I probably still haven't gotten it all out of my lungs. It should have felt like triumph. By Friday, my parents and sister were in my kitchen drinking my sparkling water, telling me to cash out $600,000 and make things fair. They said I tricked my sister by letting her take the cash while I took the house. That Grandpa would have wanted equality. And somehow, I was the villain because she spent her money fast and I spent 3 years crawling through fiberglass insulation to rebuild the corpse of a house. I told them to leave. Then they sued me. They claimed I'd defrauded the estate by hiding the true value of the property. Claimed there was some verbal agreement that I held the house in trust for the family. Claimed Grandpa never meant for one of us to walk away with more. They were going to lose, but they could tie me up in litigation for years. So I hired the most brutal real estate attorney in Portland. And I made a choice. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to bury them. Marcus Thorne looked like the kind of man who'd sue his own dentist if he chipped a crown. Real estate litigator. Expensive. Ruthless. His office smelled like leather, mahogany, and somebody else's lost property rights. I dropped the demand letter, Grandpa's will, the probate paperwork, and a binder of receipts thicker than a Bible onto his desk. He barely glanced at it. "They're trying to bleed you," he said, flipping through the pages. "They know they can't win. But if they can scare you enough, you'll write a check just to get your peace back." He looked up. "So, what kind of man are you, Blake?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm the kind of man who ate canned chili in a basement with no heat for 7 months because I couldn't afford both food and roofing shingles. I'm the kind of man who rebuilt every joist and beam in that house by hand. I'm the kind of man who doesn't write checks to thieves. I burn bridges." Marcus smiled. "Good. Retainers $5,000. We didn't just respond. We counterattacked." He filed a motion for declaratory judgment to affirm sole ownership. He followed that with a warning letter to their bargain bin lawyer, reminding them that if they pursued a fraud claim, they'd be accusing my father, the executor, of criminal fiduciary misconduct. Marcus called it putting a gun in Frank's hand and asking if he wanted to pull the trigger. They went quiet for 2 weeks. I spent that time landscaping. Something about digging in the dirt helped keep the rage from burning a hole through my chest. I planted maples along the fence line. Raked gravel until my shoulders ached. Then the emotional warfare started. My aunt called me crying. Said my mother couldn't sleep. My cousins started vague booking about greedy people who forget where they came from. I got uninvited from Thanksgiving, honestly, best gift I'd received all year. But they weren't done. One Thursday evening, I pulled into my driveway and saw a locksmith van parked in front of my house. The guy was drilling into my front door. And my dad, Frank, was standing behind him, arms crossed, pointing at the lock. They thought I'd cave. They had no idea who I'd become. The adrenaline hit me like a freight train, fast, cold, and surgical. I parked my truck behind the locksmith's van, blocking him in. Threw it into park, stepped out, and walked up the drive with the calm focus of a man who's seen his world almost collapse before, and lived to rebuild it better. "What are you doing?" I asked. The locksmith looked up, startled. Lost keys. Owner asked me to." "I'm the owner," I said, holding up my ID with one hand and the original deed with the other. "That man is trespassing." He looked from me to my dad. He said. He lied. The locksmith hesitated for all of 2 seconds before he started packing up his drill. "Yeah. I'm not getting in the middle of this." I snapped a photo of his license plate. "You just damaged my property. Expect a bill." Then I turned to Frank. You really thought you could just break in? You thought a lock was the only thing keeping you out? He puffed up, his voice rising. This is a family home. I have a right to inspect. No. I cut him off. You had a right. When you were executor. When you were selling me on how generous the split was. When you called me an idiot for keeping the house. That right ended the day you filed a lawsuit calling me a fraud. His face flushed a deep, guilty red. But he didn't back down. We are filing an injunction. You're not going to keep us out of family property. This isn't a family property, I said, stepping closer. This is my property. Built with my labor, my time, my debt. You're not trying to protect Grandpa's legacy. You're trying to steal the upside. I pulled out my phone and dialed. I didn't care how it looked. When the cops arrived, specifically Officer Miller, who I went to high school with, Frank looked like a kid caught shoplifting. Frank, Miller said, sighing. You can't drill the locks on your son's house. It's a civil dispute. Dad argued. It's attempted breaking and entering. I said. I want him trespassed. Next time he shows up, I want him arrested. Miller looked uncomfortable. Blake, it's your dad. He's a stranger. I said. Write the report. Frank left with nothing but his bruised pride and a trespass warning. I changed the locks that night. Again. This time to analog. No more digital codes. No more back doors. But it didn't feel like a victory. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the house creak like a sentry on watch. I had won the battle. But I knew, deep down, I was going to lose the war if I stayed. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the drywall seams I'd sanded smooth by hand, wondering how many more nights I'd spend like this, waiting for the next invasion. Because that's what it felt like now. Not home. Not peace. A siege. Every floorboard creak sounded like betrayal. Every shift in the house made me think of lawyers, locksmiths vans, and my dad pointing at a door he no longer owned. At sunrise, I made the call. How fast can we sell with Elise Pendon's threat still hanging? I asked Marcus. He didn't sugarcoat it. It's dicey. No sane buyer touches a title under legal cloud unless we can clear it fast. Then clear it. Okay, he said. Time to light the fuse. Marcus scheduled a deposition for Frank. A real one. Sworn testimony, court reporter, the works. He boxed my father into a corner and forced him to answer under oath. Was the original appraisal fraudulent? No, Frank admitted. It was accurate at the time. Boom. That single answer detonated their entire case. Because if the appraisal wasn't fraudulent, the whole theory of an unfair split, the alleged constructive trust, the verbal contract, it all turned to dust. They withdrew the lawsuit within 48 hours. They didn't even call me. I listed the house 3 days later. Market price, $1. $5 million. A tech exec from the Bay Area called that afternoon. His only question was about the radiant floor heating. He offered $1. $65 million in cash. I signed the paperwork the same day. 30 days until close. That month was strange. My phone became a battlefield of guilt and manipulation. From Mom. Blake, we hear you're selling. Please think of your sister. Just $50K. That's all she needs to keep her car. You'd still walk away with so much. From Chloe. I hope you choke on the money. You con the whole family. You're disgusting. I didn't respond. I blocked every number. Mom. Dad. Chloe. Even cousins I hadn't seen since Easter 2012. Then, finally, the house was empty. My footsteps echoed on the floors I'd laid, the ones they tried to take. I left the keys on the counter and walked out the front door without looking back. And that's when I did something I never thought I would. I left the state. I moved to Wyoming. 40 acres outside Jackson, mostly sagebrush and sky. My nearest neighbor's a mile away, and even he keeps to himself. It's the kind of place where your lungs hurt from breathing too deep, but only because the air's clean and thin, not full of court filings and generational guilt. I bought a steel barn kit online. Prefab, bare bones. It came on a truck with instructions in 8 languages and 0 apologies for how heavy everything was. I spent the first 3 weeks living in a camper I towed from Portland, cooking beans on a camp stove, showering with a garden sprayer I left out in the sun. It was heaven. After the deal closed, my bank account showed $1. 2 million even after taxes and paying off the mortgage I'd taken to finish the Victorian. It was more money than I'd ever had in my life. And yet somehow, all I could think about was the $19.99 Chloe once Venmo'd me back when I spotted her a sushi dinner she forgot to pay for. I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't even take a vacation. I built a foundation. Literal and emotional. The new cabin's going to be smaller. Stronger. Timber frame, not drywall. Stone fireplace. Open rafters so I can always see the bones. I don't trust walls I can't see through anymore. There's a stillness here that Portland never had. When the wind moves across the sage, it sounds like breathing. At night, the coyotes sing, and I don't feel threatened, I feel warned. Like the land's letting me know I'm a guest here, not an owner. I picked up my hammer again. Not out of desperation this time, but out of choice. I'm building something for me. Then, 2 years later, a truck pulled up to my gate. Dust kicked up behind its tires as it rolled to a stop. A guy in a blazer stepped out holding a manila envelope. "You Blake?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the letter. "From Portland." I didn't open it. I thanked him, walked over to my burn barrel, and dropped it inside. Watched the flame curl the edges. Watched it turn to ash. The flames took the letter faster than I expected. Whatever was inside, threat, plea, lawsuit, bribe, it didn't matter. I wasn't going back. Not just to Portland. To them. To any of it. I stayed by the barrel until the last scrap was gone. Just gray ash and curling black veins on the metal rim. Then I went back inside, poured a cup of black coffee, and stood in the doorway of my half-framed cabin. The Tetons loomed in the distance like sleeping giants. The wind pushed through the framing, cold and dry. I could feel winter coming. I smiled. I didn't hear from them directly again, but the gossip pipeline never dried up. You'd be amazed how much reaches you when you're off-grid but still have one friend who never left the old city. Apparently, Chloe filed for bankruptcy. Maxed out 5 credit cards. She tried to start a lifestyle brand, burned through what was left of her cash, and then begged my parents to bail her out. They did. But not without cost. Mom and Dad had to refinance their house, cut into their retirement fund. Now they tell everyone that I took the family fortune and ran. That I abandoned them. That I'm some kind of self-made millionaire who forgot where he came from. It would have hurt, once. Now, it just sounds like a bad Yelp review. Out here, my life is simple. Wake up early. Drink coffee on the porch that doesn't exist yet. Frame the west wall. Stack lumber. Haul rocks. Build slowly, with purpose. When I get tired, I don't scroll, I walk. There's a trail behind my property that leads nowhere in particular, which is exactly the point. One morning, while stacking timber, I found a mouse nest tucked into the insulation rolls. They'd made a home in the pink fiberglass, torn paper shreds, little chewed nuts. I didn't have the heart to kill them. I relocated the whole thing to the edge of the field under a stump and kept building. 2 years ago, I might have set a trap. I'm not that guy anymore. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't parade. It's quiet and heavy and earned the hard way. But sometimes peace gets interrupted. Especially when your lawyer calls with 4 words. "You're going to want to see this." Marcus never calls. Not unless it's bad or interesting. "Your sister filed a motion in Multnomah County," he said. "Trying to reopen probate." I nearly dropped my drill. "She what?" "She's claiming new evidence. Says the original will was improperly influenced. She's trying to argue your inheritance was the result of undue pressure. Essentially. She's saying Grandpa didn't know what he was doing? Worse," Marcus said. "She's saying you manipulated him. That you knew about the market value of the house, used your position of influence to get more than your fair share, and, get this, emotionally manipulated a dying man." I actually laughed. "Tell me that's not going to stick." "It shouldn't," Marcus said. "But it's not about winning. It's about wearing you down. They want you to panic, to cut a check, to settle quietly and move on." I walked outside, phone pressed to my ear. The sun was just cresting over the Tetons, turning everything gold and shadow. My boots crunched in the frost-dusted grass. "Do they even have a lawyer?" "Same firm," Marcus said. "Bottom shelf desperation in legal form. But this time, they brought in an affidavit." My stomach dropped. "From who?" There was a pause. "Your mom." That part didn't hurt. Not really. I'd been expecting it for years. But what did hurt was what she said. I reviewed it. Marcus continued. She claims you convinced Grandpa to undervalue the house so you could hoard generational wealth. That Chloe only took the cash because you convinced her the house was worthless. She even said, and I quote, Blake has always been a manipulative boy. Just like his father. I stopped walking. She threw Dad under the bus too. You still want to fight? Marcus asked. I didn't hesitate. I want a counter-motion for malicious prosecution. I want a press release drafted. I want my side in the public record. And I want to file suit for emotional distress and legal harassment if they don't drop it. There was a pause. Then Marcus said something I hadn't heard in a while. Now that's the Blake I remember. I think they expected me to fold. What they didn't count on was that I had nothing left to lose. No reputation to protect. No family dinners to salvage. No holidays to keep awkwardly peaceful. So we went nuclear. Marcus filed a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. We attached every document from the original estate, including the recorded deposition where my father confirmed the appraisal was legitimate. We included Chloe's bankruptcy filings, her penthouse lease, and even screenshots of her 2019 Instagram posts where she toasted to escaping responsibility with $250,000 and no regrets. And then we made it public. Marcus had a contact at the Oregon Inn. He pitched the story as Portland's ugliest family feud, how a renovated Victorian became a courtroom battlefield. They ran it. Full spread. They didn't use our names, but anyone who knew us would figure it out. That same week, Marcus submitted a motion for summary dismissal with prejudice, which basically means, don't ever bring this garbage into a courtroom again. I sat on the roof of my unfinished cabin the day it hit the stands, drinking coffee from a chipped enamel mug and watching the sun melt the frost off the fields below. There was a kind of pleasure in it, not revenge. Not gloating. Just clarity. The truth was out. They couldn't twist it behind closed doors anymore. A week later, Marcus called. They dropped everything. I exhaled, slow and deep. It wasn't relief. It was release. They're not going to try again? They signed an agreement. If they file anything else against you, we countersue with maximum damages. And we win. Permanently. I leaned back against the roof, staring at the wide open sky. The air out here is cold and brutal. It scrapes your lungs raw if you breathe too hard. But it's honest. I spent the next few weeks finishing the roofline, installing the windows, and cutting trim for the loft. Every nail felt like closure. Every beam like a page turned. One night, after dinner, I found a shoebox of old photos I'd taken from Grandpa's house before the estate was settled. I hadn't looked through them since. There he was. On the porch. Covered in sawdust. Holding a cup of black coffee in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. Smiling like a man who knew exactly who he was leaving the house to. The wind howled that night. Not a scream, not a moan, more like a warning whisper through the rafters. I lay in my loft under a wool blanket, listening to the structure creak and settle around me. A real cabin sings when the weather shifts. It's how you know it's alive. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over a year. Chloe had vanished off social media. Her last post was a photo of a cocktail with the caption, resetting, reclaiming, rebuilding. It got 6 likes and a passive-aggressive comment from one of our cousins about financial responsibility. I didn't miss them. But I did wonder sometimes, did they ever sit with it? The fact that they tried to steal from their own blood? That they dragged Grandpa's memory through legal mud to squeeze out one last drop of entitlement? Then again, maybe they didn't care. Maybe it wasn't about fairness or family or any of the words they'd weaponized. Maybe it was just jealousy. People don't hate you for being selfish. They hate you for having something they want, especially if you earned it and they didn't. I started keeping a journal again. Not the digital kind. An old-school leather notebook, pages warped from humidity and work gloves. I wrote about the land. The feel of lumber. The difference between building something for profit and building it for peace. In one entry I wrote, they gave me a ruin. I built a life. And it's true. They gave me what they thought was a curse. Mold and termites and broken joists. But I turned it into something. Twice. Once in Portland. Once here. Now? The new cabin is almost done. I poured the last concrete footing last week. I've got plans to build a detached shop, maybe a greenhouse if I can swing it. Every night I make a fire. I sit with my coffee and the coyotes. I stare at the stars and think about how far I've come from the man who once begged his dad not to sell a memory out from under him. He didn't listen. But I did. To myself. And I'm never going back. The day the first snow fell, I stood at the edge of my porch, coffee in hand, watching it cover the beams and gravel like a quiet apology from the sky. The cabin was sealed now. Insulated. Wired. The wood stove crackled behind me, throwing heat into the single open room I designed to be simple, strong, and clean. No secrets in the walls. No rot in the foundation. No voices bleeding through the seams. The mail still came once a week, though half the time the delivery guy just tossed it over the gate. Bills, catalogs, the occasional flyer from a hardware co-op I hadn't joined. But this time, there was another envelope. Same firm. Same Portland address. Same font that tried to ruin my life 2 years ago. I didn't hesitate. I didn't even go back to the burn barrel. I just dropped it straight into the stove. I didn't need to know what it said. Whether it was another plea, another threat, another desperate grasp from people who'd run out of rope and decided to strangle me with the frayed ends. Let them spin their stories. Let them post cryptic Bible verses about betrayal on Facebook. I'm not theirs anymore. That night, I sat at my handmade table eating stew from a tin bowl. No TV. No distractions. Just me, the fire, and the sound of the mountains outside exhaling into the dark. I thought about Grandpa. I thought about the way he used to build fence lines without saying a word, humming low and tuneless under his breath. He wasn't perfect. But he was honest. And if he could see all this now, the legal war, the lies, the greed, I think he'd pour a shot of whiskey, look me in the eye, and say, "Good. Let the dead wood burn." And it did. All of it. Burned away until only the strong grain remained. It's funny what you start to value when no one's watching. In the city, everything I built had a point, a future appraisal value, a resale hook, an aesthetic. Out here, I built a coat rack from fallen pine limbs and a bench from scrap siding because I needed them. And every time I walk past them, I smile like I just pulled one over on the entire world. I started bartering with a guy down the road, Tommy. 60, retired game warden, lives in a yurt with solar panels and 2 mutts that act like they own the valley. I helped him reframe his chicken coop after a windstorm wrecked it. He gives me eggs and coffee beans he roasts himself. Says they taste better when you earn them. He's not wrong. Tommy doesn't ask questions. That's what I like about him. He knows my name, that I build with quiet hands, and that I don't answer the phone when it rings. That's enough for him. That's enough for me. The holidays came and went. I didn't notice at first. No decorations. No forced cheer. Just a Tuesday that looked like Monday. I spent Christmas framing a storage shed and thinking about the year I ate cold ham with my parents in silence while Chloe got drunk and called me construction boy. The silence now is different. It's not empty. It's full of earned quiet. One afternoon, I drove into town to get propane. The guy at the general store, Dean, asked where I came from. I told him Oregon. He nodded like he understood. Ran from something or ran to something? He asked. Both, I said. He handed me the change and said, "Yeah, that's about right." On the drive back, with the Tetons in the rearview mirror, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. I wasn't building a new house anymore. I was building a new lineage. No inheritance battles. No toxic loyalty. No forged closeness held together by guilt and shame. Just wood, steel, stone, and the kind of peace that can't be split in a will. Spring came fast this year. One day I was chopping firewood in gloves so stiff they cracked at the knuckles, and the next I was stepping outside in a t-shirt, the whole valley waking up around me like it had somewhere to be. The roof of the shed leaked. I fixed it. The well pump blew a gasket. I pulled the whole thing apart, found the crack, and patched it with a part scavenged from a broken garden hose. Not elegant. Just effective. That's the theme out here. Doesn't need to be pretty. Just needs to work. Just needs to last. The cabin's done now. The timber frame holds solid, even in high winds. The fireplace burns clean. I carved a single word into the mantel with a pocket knife Grandpa gave me when I was 12. Enough. Not in the bitter way. Not, "I've had enough." But the other kind. The quiet kind. I have enough. And no one can take it from me. Last week, a woman came to look at the land next to mine. She's a wildlife biologist from Montana, 30-something, Drives a rust-colored SUV with a cracked windshield and more character than most cities. She waved, I nodded. That's how introductions work out here. We talked for 20 minutes about fox tracks and bear scat. She knew her stuff. She laughed when she found out I used to be an engineer in Portland. What are you now? She asked. I thought about it. Not a homeowner. Not a defendant. Not a son. Builder, I said. It felt right. She nodded. Good answer. I don't know if I'll ever tell her the whole story. Maybe one day. Maybe not. Some scars you show. Some you cover. Some you build entire cabins around so you don't have to feel them shift in your chest every time someone says, family. But for now, I have good boots, a full pantry, and walls that don't whisper someone else's regrets. That's enough for me. It was around dusk when I found it. Tucked under a flat stone near the edge of the southern fence line, half covered in last year's dry leaves. A rusted key. Big. Old. The kind that would have turned in an iron lock 100 years ago. Too heavy for a door that still existed. I turned it over in my hand for a long time. No note. No markings. Just age and metal and questions. Part of me thought it might be from the old barn that collapsed on the back of the property years ago, before I bought the land. But another part, some primitive, quiet part, wondered if it was Grandpa. Not in the ghost story sense. Not some dramatic message from beyond. More like a memory buried in the dirt, waiting for me to grow patient enough to find it. I brought it back inside, set it on the windowsill. I didn't try to use it. Didn't even clean it. Some things are meant to stay a little rusted. That night, I dreamed of the old Victorian. I was back in Portland, inside the house, but everything was off. The walls were breathing. The floors were weeping black mold. Chloe stood at the foot of the staircase, screaming without sound. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot full of paper. Dad paced in the living room, holding a lighter to the baseboards. And Grandpa sat in the corner, building a birdhouse. None of them saw me. Only he looked up. He didn't speak. Just held out a hammer. Not like an offering, like a reminder. I woke up before sunrise, heart pounding, fingers curled tight like I'd been holding a tool all night. The key was still there. So was the quiet. I made a fire. Made coffee. Sat outside with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and watched the sky go from dark blue to gold. Thought about everything I left behind. Everything I built in its place. Thought about what comes next. Because something always does. Tommy showed up unannounced the next day, a rare thing for him. He pulled up in his beat-up Ford with a cooler in the back and his 2 dogs howling like the world was ending. He waved like we were neighbors on a sitcom, not 2 men with shared silence and years of solitude in our bones. Thought you might be low on venison, he said, tossing the cooler onto my porch like a delivery man from another century. I'm not, I said. Good, he grinned. Now you've got more. He didn't ask to come inside. Just leaned on the porch rail and took in the view. The Tetons was sharp that day, jagged like memory. Snow still clung to the peaks even as the fields warmed. We didn't talk for a long time. Just listened to the wind. Then he said, You hear from your people lately? Nope. Good. I smiled. You? He shook his head. Mine are all dead or mad at me. Either way, it's quiet. We laughed. Then he pulled something out of his coat pocket. A photo. Faded. It showed a man, early 40s maybe, standing next to a half-built log cabin, hand resting on a hammer. There was sweat on his shirt, and joy in his eyes. Who's that? I asked. My dad, he said. First place he built. This spot right here, actually. Torn down now. Wasn't fancy. But it stood longer than most marriages. He handed it to me. Thought you might want to keep it. Some things ought to stay here. Not end up in a drawer in town. I took the photo. Tucked it inside the journal I kept on the windowsill, next to the rusted key. Thanks, I said. Means a lot. He shrugged. Just a photo. But we both knew it wasn't. After he left, I walked the fence line. Checked the tension on the wire. Found a rabbit hole near the eastern post and covered it with stones. When I got back to the porch, there was a hawk perched on the ridge beam, watching me. Silent. Still. It didn't fly away. It just sat with me while the sun dipped low. I didn't need a sign. But if I was the kind of man who did, that would have been enough. The next week brought the thaw. The creek that runs along the north edge of the property started humming again, ice breaking in soft cracks, water spilling through the deadfall and stone like it had somewhere to be. I built a small bridge over it. Nothing fancy. Just a few cedar planks I had left over, sanded down, and nailed into place with stubborn pride. It wasn't necessary. I could have walked around, but that's not why you build things like that. You build them because you can. I started thinking about permanence. Not in the grand legacy sense. Not like, what will they say when I'm gone? I stopped caring about that back in Portland. This was smaller. Quieter. Like, what will stay behind when I stop moving? What will hold up after time has its say? The new cabin had settled well. No cracks. No leaks. No soft spots in the seams. The kind of place that stands against weather and goes to like. Inside, it smelled like cedar, old paper, and wood smoke. My kind of sanctuary. One morning, I found myself sitting at the table with a legal pad, sketching out ideas. Not for another home. Not even a shop or outbuilding. But for a book. Not a memoir. Nothing grand. Just a manual. What to do when you inherit a wreck. What to fix first. How to brace a sagging beam without breaking the bank. Where mold hides. What insulation smells like when it lies. The stuff no one tells you. The stuff that saves you. I could write it. Quietly. Under a fake name. Maybe someone like me, years from now, would find it in a library or a garage sale bin and think, this guy's been through it. And they'd be right. Later that night, I looked through Grandpa's old tape measure, the one I kept on my belt just out of habit. It still worked. Still locked, still snapped back with that satisfying zing sound. I thought about legacy again. Not as a fortune. But as a tool. Something useful left behind. The barn got finished by accident. One Saturday I just didn't stop working. Meant to frame a shelf, ended up insulating the last wall, running conduit, staining the beams. Lost in the rhythm, nail, measure, cut, level, repeat, until the sun dipped behind the ridge and I realized there was nothing left to do but stand there. And breathe. Inside, it smelled like pine and sawdust. Like labor. Like memory, if memory had a scent that didn't twist your gut. I moved the old workbench in. Hung the hammer Grandpa gave me on a pegboard above it. Put the rusted key in a glass jar on the shelf. I still didn't know what it opened. But I liked knowing it was there. A reminder that some mysteries are meant to stay unanswered. That night, I didn't sleep in the cabin. I unrolled a sleeping bag in the barn, lit the wood stove, and lay there listening to the wind push against the metal siding. The creak of steel, the occasional ping of expanding joints. It was alive in a different way. Fiercer. More honest. At some point around midnight, I heard coyotes in the distance. Then silence. Then the sound of hooves, elk probably, passing just beyond the fence line. I didn't move. I let it wash over me like music. The kind you don't hum along with, just listen to and absorb. The stars were brutal that night. Bright enough to keep secrets from hiding. I thought about Chloe. Last I heard, she was couch surfing in Salem, working part-time at a boutique she used to shop at. Still blaming me. Still bitter. She could have built something too. But she chose speed over roots. And roots take time. I thought about my parents. Still in Portland. Still refinancing. Still telling the story the way it flatters them best. But the thing about distance, it makes their version quieter. Out here, no one knows who Blake is. No one cares about the house that used to be, or the inheritance that got away, or the lawsuit that flared up and fizzled. I'm just a man who builds. Who doesn't lock his doors because there's no one to keep out. Who doesn't raise his voice because there's no one left to argue with. Who finally, feels like the land beneath his boots might actually hold. A storm rolled in without warning, one of those Wyoming spring tempests that comes down from the mountains like it's got something to prove. The wind slammed so hard against the west wall of the cabin that I thought it might tear off the new porch roof. Rain came sideways. I bolted out of bed, pulled on my boots barefoot, and sprinted to the barn to check the siding. Everything held. No leaks. No flecks. No rattle. When you've built something with your own hands, storms don't scare you the same way. You don't wonder if it'll hold. You just stand there, soaked to the bone, nodding as lightning cracks the sky, thinking, yep. That beam's not going anywhere. I stayed out there most of the night. Sat on a bucket inside the barn, rain hammering the tin roof, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening. The storm gave me something I didn't know I needed. Closure. Not because it passed, but because I didn't flinch. 2 years ago, I would have panicked. Worried about damage, insurance, whether the house I'd bled for would betray me the way my family had. But not this time. Not here. Out here, storms are just storms. They come. They test what you've built. Then they leave. The next morning, everything sparkled. You've never seen pine needles shine like that unless you've watched them in the first light after a storm. The air smelled like slate and sap. Like beginnings. I walked the perimeter, checked every fence post. One had been knocked loose by runoff. I reset it. Packed the dirt. Tamped it down with steady pressure. That's what this life is now. Quiet repair. Not flashy. Not public. Just fixing what needs fixing before it becomes a problem. Later that afternoon, I pulled out the legal pad again. Scribbled more ideas for the book. Chapter titles like Rot Isn't Just in the Walls and Don't Trust a Beam You Didn't Inspect. There's a chapter I'm saving for last. What to do when family comes knocking. Still working on that one. 2 weeks after the storm, I found tire tracks in the dirt road that cuts through the north edge of my land. They weren't mine. Too narrow to be Tommy's truck. Too fresh to be from a rancher passing through. They stopped about 30 feet past my gate. No note. No damage. Just an engine idled there long enough to sink into the soft gravel and then backed out slow. I didn't panic. But I did walk the perimeter again. Every post. Every hinge. Every latch. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing, but it felt like the land had flinched. I spent the rest of the day reinforcing the barn doors. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. I've learned that peace doesn't mean you stop preparing, it just means you don't do it with shaking hands anymore. That night, I brought the key back inside from the jar. Set it next to my hammer on the mantel. If someone was coming, I wanted reminders of who I was and what I'd built. Tangible ones. Heavy ones. The next morning, I got a letter. Not from my parents. Not from Chloe. From Grandpa's attorney. I hadn't heard that name in years. I thought the man had retired. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. Just one sentence. Your grandfather asked me to hold this for you in case the family ever tried to take what he gave you. There was a photocopy of a journal page, Grandpa's handwriting, unmistakable. It wasn't legally binding. But it was clear. He wrote, Blake gets the house. He earned it. The girl wants money. She'll burn it. Brenda and Frank will fold. Blake won't. He's the only one who knows how to build something that lasts. Don't let them ruin him. I sat down hard in the chair by the window. I didn't cry. But I wanted to. Not because I needed the validation. Not because it changed anything. But because that man knew. He saw the cracks in the family before anyone admitted they were there. He saw me, when I was still just trying to prove I belong. I folded the note. Tucked it inside my journal, right next to the photo of Tommy's dad and the rusted key. 3 artifacts. 3 anchors. 3 reminders that some legacies aren't written in wills. They're passed through calluses and silence, and knowing exactly when to shut a door and never open it again. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say. That journal page wasn't a key to reopen the past, it was permission to leave it shut. Grandpa saw things clearly, maybe clearer than I ever gave him credit for. He didn't leave me the house as a gift. He left it as a challenge. A test. Something to either fix or be broken by. I passed. But it cost me more than I expected. That night, I lit a fire in the stove, brewed some coffee, and sat on the porch with a wool blanket around my shoulders. The sky was dark and clean. No stars yet, but I could feel them behind the clouds, waiting. I thought about Chloe. She probably wouldn't believe the journal even if I showed it to her. She needed to be the victim in her story. Needed me to be the thief. Let her. Let all of them. I have no interest in rewriting the truth for people who never cared to learn it in the first place. The next morning, I finally started writing the book. No title yet. Just a document labeled for the next guy. It begins like this. They're going to tell you to sell. They'll say it's too far gone, not worth saving. That it's smarter to take the easy payout, to leave the mess for someone else. But you're going to look at it and see something no one else does. You're going to smell the rot and still believe in what's underneath. And if you build it right, if you build it real, it will hold. Even when they come for it. Even when they come for you. I wrote for hours. No breaks. No second guessing. Just poured it out like I was back under that house, scraping mold off the joists, whispering promises to myself about how it would all be worth it someday. This was that someday. By nightfall, I had 11 pages. My hands ached. My back throbbed. And I felt better than I had in years. Not because the house was finished. Not because the lawsuit was dead. Because I knew now, finally, that the life I built out here isn't temporary. It's the plan. The air turned colder. The mountains dimmed. Coyotes howled in the far hills like they were keeping time. And inside, on my desk, next to my hammer and key, sat a pile of pages. My new blueprint. I finished the book 2 months later. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pretty. But it was honest. 160 pages of hard-won lessons, cautionary tales, practical fixes, and brutal truths. Not just about houses, but about people. About the lies we inherit, and the damage we accept because someone tells us it's just how family is. I called it Foundations, what they don't tell you about inheritance. I printed 5 copies at a local press in town. Hand-stitched binding, heavy matte paper, no ISBN. I didn't want it in bookstores. I wanted it in garages. In dusty glove compartments. On workbenches stained with oil and regret. I gave one to Tommy. He didn't say much. Just flipped through the pages, grunted once, then nodded. Yeah. This'll help someone. That was enough. I kept 1 copy on my nightstand. Not for ego. For memory. On the spine, I carved a small mark, just a notch, like the kind you'd score into a joist to remind yourself which way it's bearing weight. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, the days have gotten longer. The creek's louder. The field's greener. The porch swings slow in the wind, empty but not lonely. Every so often, I'll see tire tracks by the road. New ones? Different ones? Maybe folks curious about the land. Maybe someone who read the book. Maybe someone looking for a reason to start over. Let them come. There's room out here for people who want to build. Not steal. Not scheme. Not rewrite the past to make their reflection prettier. But build. I haven't heard from my family in over a year. Not a text. Not a postcard. Just silence. And honestly, it's a beautiful sound. The key still sits by my desk. Rusted. Heavy. Still unopened. Still unanswered. I think I finally understand why I kept it. Because some doors aren't meant to be unlocked. Some are just meant to remind you who had the courage to walk away. I built peace from ashes. That's the truth I keep coming back to. They gave me wreckage, legal, emotional, physical, and I made something livable. Not just the house. Not just the land. Me. I still walk the property every morning. Coffee in hand, boots wet with dew. It's a routine now. A ritual. The wind carries nothing from the past anymore. No voices. No guilt. Just clean air and the sound of fences holding strong. Sometimes I catch myself glancing toward the road, half expecting another envelope, another threat dressed up as family concern. But nothing comes. Not anymore. I think about Grandpa often. His hands. His silence. The way he built without ever asking permission. I understand that now. The key still sits untouched. The book's tucked away. The hammer's still hanging. Everything that matters I carry forward. The rest, I left behind. And as the sun rises over the ridge, painting the cabin in gold, I know this isn't the end of the story. It's just the first chapter no one can take from me.